The way Marvel shoehorn diversity into their comics is the reason the sales have been tanking for months, if not years. Changing characters that have been around for decades for no good reason and trying to capitalize on social issues is a cynical move that's driving away fans. And these companies are being taken over by left-wing extremists who are forcing you to think and feel a particular way, and if you don't, you'll be judged and labeled as a terrible person. Well, that all sounds f***ing crazy, doesn't it? Let's find out if there's any truth there. If you're not familiar with who or what Comicsgate is, then check out the video I did last week that gives a brief overview of the group. It seems that the main thing this group are concerned with are comic book sales and politics. We're going to determine if they're right by looking for the evidence of their claims and seeing if they hold up, starting with comic book sales. The way comic book sales are tracked is really weird, especially if you want to collect real, useful data about how well received a comic book series is. Basically, the comic companies, like Marvel, will sell a load of books to a retailer and those books are counted as sales, whether the retailer sells them all or not. So that alone isn't a good metric to use, but there are two metrics that are useful and they are pre-sales and retailer summits. Pre-sales are pretty self-explanatory. The retailer will receive a certain number of sales before they receive a book, which is a direct message from the fans that they want a particular book. Where the water gets muddied is in the retailer summits. Retailer summits are basically events where retailers can give feedback to executives from publishing companies like Marvel. A controversial example of this happened in 2017 when executive David Gabriel received feedback at a retailer summit from retailers about what kind of books were helping keep their business afloat and which ones were not. During an interview, Gabriel mentioned that retailers said they didn't want diversity or female-led comic books, as these sorts of books were hurting their sales. Unfortunately, the way Gabriel spoke made it sound like this was a consensus of all retailers, which it wasn't. It's not clear just how many retailers had this view, but in any case, this quote was taken out of context and was used as ammunition in the fight back against diversity in comics. So far, we've not found any answers. The way comic book sales are tracked is clear as mud, and we don't know how many retailers actually complained about diversity in comics versus how many encouraged more of it. So let's have a look at some stats and see if they hold up the argument against diversity. Well, in 2014, Marvel's top digital seller was Miss Marvel, a comic about a Muslim girl who becomes a superhero. Yeah, that same Miss Marvel that is Disney Plus's latest series. But that's just company spin, right? Of course they'd say that. You may have a point there. But then you look towards the Hugo Awards, the premier literary awards for science fiction and fantasy. 3 Marvel books were honoured, and 2 of those 3 were Black Panther and Miss Marvel. So unless you think the Hugo Awards are in cahoots with Marvel, then it seems that these types of comics are worthy. In fact, sales of Miss Marvel have sold over 500,000 copies as of its 10th collection. But why am I focusing on this particular character or series? Well, partly because these figures happened before the aid of a live action TV show or film, and partly because Miss Marvel is used as an example of forced diversity in comics. So is that it? Does their argument fall apart? Yeah, kinda, especially when it comes to comic book sales. But what about the other stuff? And before I talk about the other stuff, it's about time I remind you to hit that subscribe button. Most of my videos on this channel are guides to help you make comics, but sometimes I do videos like this too. If you find anything particularly useful, hit that button, and if there's anything you're confused by, let me know in the comments. To say that comics and politics don't belong together is like saying that peanut butter and jam don't belong together. It's just wrong, no matter how you slice it. But before we get into the weeds of it, we need to establish the difference between politics and philosophy. To put it super basically, philosophy is thinking something like men and women should have equal rights, and politics is taking that thought and applying it to things like equal pay or voting rights. So where do comics fit in? Well, comics were, are, and always will be philosophical. Just as any work of art, it has a point of view, and traditionally 99% of all comics have had a point of view that lends itself to progressive politics. Captain America punched Hitler on the cover of this comic before America joined World War II. Superman talks about justice and is the arbiter of social justice. He's probably the most famous social justice warrior of all time. The X-Men have long been seen to be reflective of civil rights issues, as well as issues around sexuality, as they often reference, quote, mutant rights. See the parallel? Okay, well let's hear from Stan Lee. Responding from letters from readers, Stan said, "From time to time we receive letters from readers who wonder why there's so much moralizing in our mangs. They take great pains to point out that comics are supposed to be escapist reading and nothing more, but somehow I can't see it that way. It seems to me that a story without a message, however subliminal, is like a man without a soul. In fact, even the most escapist literature of all, old-time fairy tales and heroic legends, contained moral and philosophical points of view. At every college campus where I may speak, there's as much discussion of war and peace, civil rights, and the so-called youth rebellion as it is of our Marvel mags per se. None of us lives in a vacuum. None of us is untouched by the everyday events around us, events which shape our stories just as they shape our lives. Sure, our tales can be called escapist, but just because something's for fun doesn't mean we have to blanket our brains as we read it. Excelsior. So where does that leave us? Comic book sales are not tanking, and some of the best sellers have a diverse lead in the title. Comics have always had a progressive and liberal philosophy, and that hasn't changed in almost 100 years. So what's the argument here? The conclusions you come up with are up to you. Maybe you think there is some weird conspiracy theory concocted by the left where they want to I don't know, what do they want to do? Make you more tolerable or informed of other people and their culture? To respect women? I don't know. Whatever it is, I assume it makes you angry. But don't worry, I've got an idea that will help. If making Superman's son bisexual makes you angry, then don't buy it. If you find the idea of Jane Foster becoming Thor offensive, then don't read it. I've said on this channel before that there are a lot more to comics than superheroes and the big two. If you're that passionate about comics, then support indie creators who are doing excellent work. I know Comicsgate has close ties with Indiegogo, and a lot of the biggest members of that group use the crowdfunding website to rake in hundreds of thousands of dollars from backers. If you're passionate about their project, then that's great and is a healthy and wonderful thing to do. If you're backing them because you think it will show the boogeyman that is the social justice warrior or leftist elitist, then you're only lining in the pockets of people who like to stoke the flame of your fear. But I'm not here to tell you what to do with your money. I just hope you can direct your energy and passion in a positive way to make comics as awesome as they can be, instead of being angry and gatekeeping characters that should be accessible to everyone. Because when they are, comics will continue to grow, and we, as fans and creators alike, will benefit the most from it. I've been Brinkley, have fun drawing, and be nice to each other.